Welcome to Career Pod, your Audible career fair podcast. I'm your host, Dana Francis. Thank you so much for returning for the second part of our interview with James Seabrook. If you didn't catch the first part, no worries. Episode 4A is just one episode back from this one. This week, we dive into some of the difficult questions with owning your own business, like how do you keep the lights on? So far, all the entrepreneurs I've met, there seems to be this equation, and that's sacrifice, hard work, then repeat. Owning your own business is not for the faint of heart. We also chat this week about two projects James is really passionate about. His band, Despite the Blindness, and also his podcast, Bottom Shelf Recording Talk. Without further ado, here's part 2 of our interview with James. Hope you enjoy.
It's pretty tough. In the city of Edmonton, there are in the neighborhood of 60 some studios that actively seek out work, which makes the competition in Edmonton, which is a small market, pretty. I think we are per capita. We have the second most studios in North America per capita. Nashville being number one because that's a music hub.
So you're already speaking to a lot of the drawbacks and it really say like you're selling it, but at the same time it's kind of the realistic view of it, that this is not going to be something that if you do go into school and you rack up all those student debts, that this is going to be a reality. Can you speak to, as an owner of your own studio, what are the drawbacks? And obviously there's a lot of competition out there. Like, how do you keep the lights on?
Well, how do I keep the lights on? Incredible sacrifice. The first 3 years I was borrowing money almost monthly to help pay bills. And the last 4 years I've been more or less self-sufficient. And it comes down to this being a job where I care less about the money and more about what I do.
The people.
Sometimes it's the people. Sometimes the people get in the way, like any job, right? But I care. I'm always struggling with the financial side of it because money to me doesn't mean as much as it does to most people. I've been living on less than $12,000 a year for the last, well, it's 7 years now. It'll be 8 years right away. And that's because every dollar that I can afford, I put back into the studio. I'm lucky that I'm with a partner that completely understands what I do and why I do it. And I know she struggles with it too, but she accepts it, and we always find a way to make it work. But I lived in my truck for 5 months because that was the only way I was going to afford to keep the doors open. Because there was no possible way that I could afford a rent payment on top of the studio. And of course, this place is not zoned for me to live here. So I thought about, why don't I just live at the studio? And that creates a whole different bag of terrors. And the one thing that always rang true for me was, I don't want to lose this place, and I'm going to do everything I can to not lose this place. And that included, okay, I'm not going to live at the studio. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to live in my truck for 4 or 5 months. I'm going to find a hole that I can sleep in just so that I can have an address that's not the studio. Despite the fact that I probably ended up spending 18 or 20 hours a day here anyway, but this is an industry where in order to make it successful full time at this and not have to take on another job, you have to be willing to sacrifice, and you have to be willing to not make money.
At the same time, you've said this is the best job
Yeah.
in the world. This brings you joy.
The the thing I keep coming back to, and whenever I talk to students about this, or I talk to people who really question, why do you keep doing this? It all comes back to, I've never made less money in my life, but I've never been happier. I've never felt so much satisfaction in my life. And I know there's a lot of people that aren't like this, but I'm one of those people that I define myself by what I do, not by who my friends are, not by who my connections are, not by any other common metric. I define myself by the work that I do. And I certainly don't always do amazing work, but what I get to do on a day-to-day basis, how I get to help people, how I get to be a useful member of at least my little society, these are the things that ultimately make me happy and make me willing to sacrifice pretty much everything in order to maintain that, without any regret or guilt. And that's at 25, I never would have been able to do that. I never would have been able to give up my apartment. But at 30, when I finally made the choice to do this, it was just not a thought.
Can you speak a little to why you decided to open up your own studio?
Yeah.
It's like, why did you go down the crazy train?
Is another one of those things I tell my students all the time. If I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have actually opened my own studio. Owning a studio is the single biggest inhibitor to me making money. Because this place cost me so much every month just to keep open. And that's, a lot of that is bad money management. A lot of that is not understanding business and not having business early years. And there's a lot of debt in there that factors into that. But owning a studio is the single greatest part of, no, that's not true. You know what? That's the geek in me. The geek side of me that loves the toys, that loves the instruments, that loves playing with the gear. That side of me loves owning a studio. And I always would in some form or another, but so let me get back to your actual question. I opened the studio specifically because I wanted a location where I could have all my tools and I could bring people where I was in control of how the whole process went. And I wanted that environment. Prior to that, all through my 20s, I'd still done recording. I owned a studio, or I'd started a studio many years earlier, and I'd had enough equipment that I could move into someone's basement or someone's garage, or moved into an office for a weekend once to do recordings. But I didn't enjoy the moving of the equipment, and it was a huge detractor. So having a studio, having a fixed location where I could just put everything, here's my toolbox, come to my space where I have all my tools. It's like the difference between a mechanic shop versus a mobile mechanic. It's just so much more convenient for the mechanic to go to his shop rather than have him come to your garage.
And the affordability, it's nice to be able to find a place that you can go record and it not completely financially cripple you, because You're already in that position where you're like, I'm putting my heart and soul into this.
Yeah.
And I can't have it, mean my daughter's never going to go to college because of it.
Well, and that happens a lot for the music industry specifically, but that speaks very much to one of the things that I want to continuously work towards is make the prospect of recording more affordable. I know 2009, before I opened the studio, I shopped around recording studios in town and looking to do a record, and I was trying to find something that was both affordable and accomplish what I wanted. Nothing was affordable. No, I totally understand where they were all coming from at this point, but that was a big deal, is making things super affordable for someone like you while walking that fine line of affordability for me, the studio owner. And so that's always going to be a tricky balance, but we'll always find a way to make it work.
Can we flip back to a little bit more about you being a musician, vocalist, songwriter?
Yeah.
What are some of the projects you've worked on in the past that you fondly remember? Like, is there any one particular thing that kind of pops up in your memory?
You mean as speaking from myself as a performer side? Yeah. So the most I've been in, since I opened the studio, I've been in three different bands. Strangely enough, all of them as a bass player. I had to learn bass here at the studio because bass players tended not to be very good. And sometimes it would just be easier for me to replay their part than to fix them. But the thing that stands out most favorably to me was my own project dating back to 2009. It was a band called Despite the Blindness. I was the singer, guitar player, and main songwriter. And we, it's funny that you're bringing this side up. I'm about to re-release the first recording that we did in 2009, a 4-song album. I did all the production. It did not sound very good. And so over the last year, I've been reworking it. Despite the Blindness was the single greatest musical project I've ever been a part of. The drummer and I connected musically like I haven't ever with anyone before or since. The bass player we brought in was the perfect match to the drummer's playing style and my writing style. And the three of us, we really had a great chemistry live. And so it just worked really well. I listened back to the songs we wrote, and there's definitely some pretension there. That's probably never going to go away from me musically, but it was a wonderful blend of song, like pop-ish songwriting mixed with complexities that don't exist in most pop music. And not that we were pop, we were more rock and roll, generically, but we had one comparison that we were a combination of Rush, Tool, and Tom Waits, which is hard to make sense of, but it was rock music that intentionally made things complicated and walked the line between sounding complicated and not sounding complicated. And I really miss that in a lot of music these days. Yeah. Anyway, so that
I'm
project.
really happy you brought this up, because now it's an opportunity to throw it in the show notes, because maybe a listener out there is like, you know what, that's exactly, we're on the same wavelength. I really want to hear music like that. And it really is hard nowadays in the music industry. Like, I kind of feel maybe it's just the old lady in me coming out, but I'm just like, everything's kind of sounding a little bit the same. And
sounding recycled, and
you just want to see a little variety out there. So I'm really happy you brought this up, because I'm looking forward to listening to it myself, because I actually haven't come across it yet. I believe when people think of career musicians, they think about all the perks: traveling to new places, meeting new people, doing what they love, partying, obviously. But what are the downsides to this lifestyle? Like, if you're to meet someone, 18, they're like, I'm really passionate about this, and this is the path I want to go down. What would you warn them about?
Well, it's, I guess the biggest thing I'd warn them about is what are you willing to sacrifice? An 18-year-old doesn't have much to sacrifice. And so it's so much easier for them to explore the world of being a professional working musician where that's their income. But I guess the biggest thing I can warn anybody about is the glamour only comes to the 1% or the half of the 1%, right? Everyone else is, unknown, hardworking, finding work where some of the most successful working musicians I know are so multidisciplined that they find income from diversifying they find income from diversifying within their chosen area of life, right? One of them is a guitar teacher and a host at a couple different bars at night, like for open stages, and works with a number of different bands, and then does studio work when he's hired to come into the studio and play on someone else's record, and so it's a variety of different things.
On top of everything else, we're gonna kind of switch back here to another gear, because you're talking about being multifaceted, and you also have your own podcast. Can you speak a little bit to what that's about and what it means to have yet another job on top of that list?
So the podcast is one of the things, it's one of the things I do for fun. It started because my co-host, Joey Roach, that's his actual name, Roach. He needed an opportunity to blow off steam. He was stood up by a client at the studio here 2 days in a row. And he ended up losing a whole pile of money on it, and he just needed to rant. And we talked about how, we would have these same conversations almost a weekly basis anyway. We talked about, well, why don't we just record them and throw them on iTunes and see if anybody would pay attention? And that evolved into what the podcast is now. But it's the one thing I do weekly that is really just for fun. And I take it seriously, because I can't do anything without being serious about it. But it really is, I will always find a way to do it, especially now that podcasting is a common thing for a lot of us to do. I like to talk, as this interview has shown. And it allows me to geek out about a lot of the stuff that I just want to geek out with. And truth be told, there's not a lot of us that want to have those kind of conversations. So to have a host like that where I can go back and forth on the audio geekery stuff, it just makes it that much more fun.
We're in a time where it's okay to be a geek or a nerd. I remember growing up and it was like the last thing you wanted to be, but it's like now in my 30s, I'm like, I'm totally embracing this. It's like, no, I am that nerd, that sweaty, nervous, introverted. And I was like, I'm embracing it and I am loving it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about where we can find information about your studio, information about your podcast?
Sure. Okay, so the studio is www.twobodiesofwater.com, TWO bodiesofwater.com. Find us on Instagram and Twitter. I can give you those handles too if you want. The podcast is, if you Google Bottom Shelf Recording Talk, it'll come up. That's probably the best way. I can give you the direct links for the show notes.
Thank you, James, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. Without your support and encouragement, I don't honestly know if I would have had the courage to breathe light into this project. It's not easy putting yourself out there in the world. Everyone has their own demons of self-doubt. But you know what? When we push ourselves past those boundaries of comfort, we learn new things, we meet new people, and we grow. Next week, we are joined by Kendra Kincaid, air traffic controller and founder of Elevate Aviation. If you have any interest in aviation careers, You need to listen to this episode. It is amazing. This week, much like last, we are in for a treat. We have a short music sample from Despite the Blindness called Paper Hero. Let us know what you think. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Just search CareerPod.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Till we meet again, stay passionately curious.